Welcome back to another UNC Tar Heels basketball recruiting podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're watching us on our growing YouTube channel, that is called Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI Publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is our Director of Basketball Recruiting, longtime AAU college and high school coach, our very own David Sisk. And David, for the first time in 15 months, when June hit on the calendar, the floodgates open. Kids in all sports could visit schools in person. They can meet with coaches in person. That was a wonderful opportunity for them to get to know a lot of stuff, get a lot of intel, really figure out where they're comfortable and maybe where they're not comfortable. The same thing goes for coaching staff. So we're going to do two podcasts here. One, we're going to talk about UNC's recruiting in the month of June, what the staff did on campus and where they went. And we're going to do a second podcast for everybody to enjoy this July 4th weekend. We're going to focus more on Hubert Davis, not just the month of June, but his first 3 months on the job. So your initial thoughts, one full month in, as we're a couple hours away from June ending. What are your thoughts on the job that Hubert Davis and his staff did in the first full month of the open period?
Well, I think he had a good month any way you slice it. If you want to look at commitments, he got 2 from Will Shaver and Seth Tremble. If you want to look at official visits and unofficial, we had 7 officials, 2 unofficials to give us 9 total. And I think if you compare that to just about anybody, any other program in the country, I mean, I don't know the count of everybody, but I don't know that there was another program in the country that had 9 visitors on campus in 1 month. And if they did, they were certainly up in the very top. And then out on the trail, looking at players here during the live periods here in the last week. So I think I think he's had a successful month of June.
I think what was interesting, and again, we'll hit on a lot more Hubert stuff in the second podcast that we do, but I think it was really interesting that some of the visits, some of the official visits overlap, but there was the way who they prioritized, who they brought in, what they were looking for. And then a couple of the guys that they went out, that they didn't bring in for OVs, but they went out and watched but offered. Tyler Nickel was an example, Ken Whitmore, another one. They offered them later in the month. So when you look back at the 7 OVs and then the 2 kids they offered late that the staffs in entirety went and saw play. In fact, on the same weekend, Whitmore up at DeMatha in Hyattsville, Maryland. And the next day, Tyler Nickel was in the Winston-Salem area, and the whole staff went and saw those guys play. What did you gauge from that?
First of all, let's look at the overlap. I don't know, exactly why that happens. I'll start to say why they would do that, and that may come across in a way I don't want it to happen. I don't mean that negatively at all. One thing I've noticed in covering programs in the past, now I'm not done it as long as you have, but I've covered Memphis, Vanderbilt, Minnesota, and Kentucky, North Carolina at one time or another since, I guess, 2015 or so. And I've seen these happen where they overlap. And a lot of times they do it, it's guys in the same position. And it's like they're saying, okay, we got you 2 guys in, which one wants to come? And perhaps putting pressure on the other, a little bit of peer pressure on which one, basically playing a game of chicken, who's going to come and do it. So that may have been the case, but when you have 9 visits and then you're out on the road too, recruiting, it's hard. If they're in 3 days, let's say they come in Sunday night, they leave Tuesday morning. You're still looking at, and that's what most of them do, like on the weekend. They come in Friday night, let's say, and leave Sunday morning. You're still looking at 27 days out of a 30. So, you're going to run into some of that, especially when you've been as aggressive with it as they have. So, it obviously, I mean, they've known what they're doing, what they've been doing so far. They've come up with 2 commitments. Like I said, I think Seth Tremble was the one to really give Hubert Davis some momentum because he could be a potential 5-star. He's probably going to be in the top 30 when he ends up in the final rankings for class of 2022. So, his first go around, and I think you learn from things. I don't know exactly what he would learn. He may be happy with everything they've done, but first go around, there's obviously been nothing wrong with what's happened.
I think some of the overlapping could also be attributed to the fact that there were so many kids trying to cram, a half a year's worth of visits and OVs and all that kind of stuff, relationship building into a short period of time. And we saw that a lot in football, where there were a lot of official visits during the week. Some of the basketball ones were during the week as well. So I think, to me, Will Shaver, I was in Camden Yards at an Orioles game, the first one I've been to in 4 years, and Dina calls me and he's like, Will Shaver committed? And like, wow, right out of the gate, Hubert was able to get one. And some people say, well, it's just Will Shaver. He's only ranked number 130, whatever it is. I think the fact that he brought a dude in and boom, right away the kid committed, that said a lot. I thought that really got the month going really, really well and showed the rest of those kids when they came in there for their officials, David, they already knew that a guy came in, hadn't met the staff in person before, and boom, popped right away. That, to me, was a big, big time positive for Hubert.
Yeah, and let me say this first. When you talked about, the visits, another reason to overlap, just in case on basketball people aren't aware of the schedule, the juniors, we did get confirmation that the NCAA has allowed June to be the junior visits. And just 2 or 3 years ago, for the first time, they could take 5 as juniors. Now, up till then, players could only take visits as seniors. So they took 5 official visits as juniors, but since COVID was there, they couldn't do that. So they, like you say, they crammed them all into June. July is going to be a very busy AAU schedule, and just about all these guys. There's so many of them play Nike, for example. They're going to be on the road. They're going to be in North Augusta for 14 days from the 13th to the 27th. They're going to play the seasonal EYBL schedule plus the Peach Jam. So you're going to play a week, qualify, and then you're going to play the Peach Jam. Under Armour has 2 or 3 events. Adidas has 2 or 3 events across the country. So it's going to be busy. So you can't do that in July. Then when you get to August, then you're looking at the senior visits. A lot of these guys may visit again, or they may totally take 5 different visits. They may not take any at all. They may take 1 or 2. Who knows? There's a lot of options. But getting back to what you said about Will Shaver, like I said, he made perfect sense, because I think if you look at a 5-star type player, they're going to take all their visits. Jalen Washington came in right in behind him. Jalen Washington's in no hurry. He's a top 25 player. There's going to be room for him no matter where he goes. He'll still be around in the fall. But if you're Will Shaver, like I said, why not make that commitment? North Carolina is as good as you're going to get. You're ranked like a number 140. The staff liked what they saw. And so it made total sense that he came in and said right off the bat, look, I'm not going to do any better than North Carolina. I'm not going to get another offer. This Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, they're not going to offer. So, yeah, I'm doing it. And
coincidence or not, going back to what you said about sometimes some of these overlapping visits, the little competitive spirit in there, just trying to gauge guys. Jaden Bradley was in June 15th. Seth Tremble was in the next day. And I'm not saying that they can't get both, but I think conventional wisdom would suggest that, Seth Tremble seeing Jaden Bradley there, figure, okay, if I want to go there, if I want to go play where my brother played, maybe I got to go ahead and pop. Now, that's what conventional wisdom says, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was the case with Seth Tremble popping for the Tar Heels.
No, and like I said, there were 2 things that happened really for Seth Tremble. And number one was, obviously, it came on top of the visit. He liked what he saw. And then, Michigan really was the other player here. And when Doug McDaniels committed there, it really took them out of the equation. And when it came out like 2 days after he returned home that he was going to make a commitment, I mean, it was pretty obvious that it was going to be North Carolina. So these things worked out really well. And like I said, that worked out really, really in Hubert Davis's favor, because, Seth Trimble's legit. And the more that I've talked to people after we done our commitment podcast, they're really blown away by his athleticism. He has got 5-star athleticism with his quickness, with his burst, his vertical speed up and down the court. I mean, he is a big, big time athlete who's got skill to go with it.
young kid, still growing, plenty of upside, and he's somebody that you've talked to his coach a lot. And his coach says, "Look, there's a lot of room between where he is now, where he's going to end up," and that's not always the case with kids that are going in their senior years in high school. When you also look back at this month too, the thing I think was very, very successful about it for Hubert, he got his big man in the class and he got his point guard. And as we talked about in the Seth Tremble podcast when he committed, it's so important when you get that point guard so the rest of the guys in the class, they know who they're going to be playing with. They know who the dog on the ball is going to be. That's so very, very important to them. I think the other thing is there was some clarity for Hubert and his staff with respect to that shooting wing, that small forward spot. Justin Taylor, a lot of people thought he was trending toward Carolina, but after a visit, for whatever reason, he goes to Syracuse, goes to Indiana. For whatever reason, he ended up picking Syracuse. He's got a great opportunity to step in and play a lot there. That may have been part of it. So for Hubert and his staff, they got some clarity. Okay, they like Justin Taylor, but Justin Taylor's now out of the picture. So as that was moving away, they offered Tyler Nickel, they offered Cam Whitmore, and they're narrowing their focus there. So I think that they leave June having a much better idea of where they're going to end up at that wing shooting position than they had when they got into June.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, they can move on to other spots here. Now, they may add another post because, they could be down to not a whole lot. And let's not forget this one too. Let's throw Dawson Garcia in there. And I'd honestly, when we were preparing for this, I hadn't even thought about it, and it just hit me now. But that's a guy right there. Obviously, North Carolina fans have been watching him since last February when he came in and torched the Tar Heels, and then you have the coach firing. That all lines up with Wojo, and then and then you start thinking, well, he could be a candidate for the transfer portal. And then, he looks pro, and then finally he does. So, that's another guy down there. And from what we heard, very good source on this, North Carolina, Illinois, and Arizona, your three. So
couple of good sources, not just one, multiple sources on that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We had three, but the one source at the end on those three, even after we did original story, which we put on in the Four Corners forum. But going back to that, now he would be next year. But let me tell you what, if you get a Dawson Garcia, everybody in the country is going to notice. And then that momentum is just boom. And you're like, wow, man, they've got, they got a guy here who's Big East all freshman, and obviously he's got a lot of pro potential on down the road.
Well, I thought Brady Manick was the perfect pickup. If you would have taken all the guys that entered the portal, I thought Manick was the most perfect pickup for Carolina. If you were to add someone like Dawson Garcia, he'd be the perfect pickup part two for Carolina. And there would be some complications there because Manick and Garcia somewhat play the same position. Carolina fans need to remember a couple of things. Number one, the defensive job that Garcia did down low in that game when Marquette came into the Dean Dome, he defended like a bit, but he played offensively a little bit like a wing. But this also might be a deal. And in your report, which was very thorough, that a lot of people a year ago thought about Dawson Garcia might be a candidate to go one and done. But that didn't happen. He's not rated super highly right now by the NBA. So he may think, okay, I might not quite be an NBA guy as a perimeter dude at 6'11". So I need to add that interior element to my game. You go to North Carolina and you say, okay, I'm going to put in 2 years. I'm going to learn to play the interior, could be the man there in 23. Then it makes a lot of sense because he's still the outside guy. So he can still shoot threes. He can still face the basket, but he could become a better, more well-rounded player down in the post, which might make him more of a viable NBA product. So that might make a lot of sense for him to say, okay, I'm going to take a couple steps backward and take a lot more steps forward down the road. If he were to seriously consider Carolina, don't you think that's probably what the thinking would be?
Yeah, and they still, right now, they've got guys that I'm convinced of. I'm just going to be honest with you. I feel like they're about too deep in the post. I mean, they can play a third player, obviously, McCoy, but I just don't know how big of a difference maker he can be. So to me, there's still time to be had in the post play. Yeah. And I think you could take a combination of Manic, a Baycott, and a Garcia, man, and that's a tough front court. I think you can play those three together, interchangeable, and there's still a lot of time there. I don't know that Baycott, with his size and his physicality anyway, is necessarily going to be a 38, 39 minute a game guy, just because, he's carrying weight on him. So I think you need another guy in there, especially Garcia. I mean, you don't turn down a Dawson Garcia.
Well, for the sake of discussion too, if Armando's at say 30, let's say and it gets a good conference opponent, he's at 32, and you got Manic at 25, there's 23 minutes right there for a guy like Garcia. And that's not the 30 or whatever it was he averaged at Marquette, but he's also not at Marquette. He left there for a reason. So that investment at 23 and in his second year in Carolina would turn into 30 like Baycott, and that might be the avenue to the NBA.
Well, and it may be how it starts out, but playing time is not a constant as the season goes, Andrew. So if he plays well, his time's going to go up. I mean, it's like supply and demand. If you set the market, with how you play, and playing time comes from that. One other thing I'll say too, with name, image, and likeness, getting into that with him, if you have, let's say it is those three, and Illinois, those are three very strong basketball programs.
Yeah.
We're not talking about, the worst program in the Big Ten and some school out there in the desert somewhere that's never had a winning season. But still, nationally, for name, image, and likeness, I would think that North Carolina would have the strongest presence there on a national basis, which is going to be very important now. But now I understand you're going to be able to do a lot. You've got in Champaign, Illinois, or in Phoenix, in Tucson, and then, you bring Phoenix into it, you bring Chicago. I understand all that. So you're going to do well either way, but I think there would be a lot of advantages going to North Carolina. So we'll see. We thought North Carolina would be a player there, and they are. So maybe we're here at the end of the month in July, 31 days from now, we can get on here and talk about what a great July Hubert Davis had.
Yeah, well, and just to go back on the NIL thing, which I think is a great point, and I think it's when we start from this point on, I think we need to, I told some people on our board, you need to start looking at recruiting through the lens of NIL. Yeah. And the opportunities that kids are going to get. And I think it's going to help the blue bloods in basketball. You and I had a conversation the other day, and you said you've talked to people in the industry and they think it's actually going to even the playing field in football. I don't want to get into a whole NIL discussion, but to stay on basketball and Dawson Garcia specifically, markets don't matter. It's your social media presence. It's how many people follow you. How do you connect with people that will never, ever see you? So they're going to follow you on Twitter, they're going to follow you on Instagram, and how do they relate to you? And North Carolina fans, like Kentucky fans, like Indiana and Kansas fans, there's a NASCAR-esque kind of thing about them where they're very loyal to the things that are part of them, that are part of that culture. So we're going to see how UNC basketball fans respond to the kinds of things that Armando Baycott and Caleb Love and Leaky Black are pitching on Twitter and on Instagram. We're going to see all that play out the next year. Nobody really knows, but there are some pretty educated prognostications on how this is going to play out. And a guy at North Carolina who gets a couple of Duke Carolina games a year is going to have a chance to really drive up the social media following, and that is going to result in cash. So if you're a Dawson Garcia and the end game is the NBA, you go to North Carolina, you can go through the process, give yourself some time, not be in a hurry, and still make some pretty good cash. And you have the time to get yourself ready for the next level. I think it's going to help the blue bloods in that case for guys like Garcia who want to transfer, and also high school kids that are looking at a 3 or 4 year process.
I talked to two individuals today, Andrew, two monsters, legends, I would call them, in the recruiting game from a media standpoint. Two guys that I trust explicitly. I had two texts going at one time, and I asked them the same question, and here was a weird thing. And neither one of these guys is rivals. Okay, so but just guys that are just and it's not Andrew Jones either. I know he's a legend, but it's not Andrew Jones. But
Not even a legend in my own office, which is in my
not
house.
even in your own mind.
No,
But
sometimes.
it was weird. I asked them two questions. I asked them the same questions, and they couldn't have been on more opposite poles with each answer. Okay, will name, image, and likeness impact the factors of looking at these high-end players? Derek Lively, Jalen Washington, guys like there. One said yes, one said no. Is name, image, and likeness overrated? One said yes, one said no. But what one of them told me, they said it won't be the top 10 player who's impacted here, because he said no matter what you make in name, image, and likeness, if you're a second contract guy in the league that can sign that max, he said, whatever, you could make 7 digits a year in college basketball, and that's peanuts compared to what you're going to get in the NBA. He said it's still going to be about development. But he told me this. He said that guy who is not, won't be the top guys, top 15, top 20. He said, but that guy ranked between top 25 and top 50 that might be in college for 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, that may be a journeyman in the pro, that may be have a good, solid career, but he's not going to be Michael Jordan or James Worthy. Okay. That kind of guy, they said those are the ones that are going to get impacted off name, image, and likeness. Dawson Garcia kind of fits that bill to me. Yeah. As that type of player. And I think of what Hubert Davis is offering right now, when you look at Isaac Trout, you look at Tyler Nickel, you look at, and he said too, it may even go on down to like 50 to 100 too. So you look at those guys and you see so many of them, they kind of fit that bill where you could say, okay, you're probably not one and done. So you may be able to make Kentucky's one and done. Kansas is a lot of one and done. Duke's one and done. North Carolina's the one that's kind of held their ground on this. So you may be able to be better off at North Carolina, staying for a couple of years than you would anywhere else in the country.
If you go to North Carolina, you're guaranteed 6 Carolina Duke games. And you know what the ratings are on those. And you're also guaranteed, well, not guaranteed, but it's likely you're going to be in a situation to play an extended period of time in the NCAA tournament. And that's where the most exposure is. The Carolina Duke games in the NCAA tournament, that's where the exposure is. So that's why North Carolina and Duke, and even for Duke with the kids that are only there for a year. And I don't know what Shire's going to do. I think John Shire, I'm not even going to predict what he's going to do. I think it was a really good hire. And it's a hire I've been telling people for a couple of years. I thought that's where Duke was going to go. It'll be interesting to see what he does with respect to one and dones. But even if a kid goes there 1 year, and you've heard some crazy numbers at certain schools for 1 year guys, there's going to be money there for certain guys. But you're right. And I think that's what's really important. I think maybe as we look back at the month of June and saw who Hubert brought in, he brought in a couple of the UAD guys, but also brought in a lot of guys that look like they're going to more than likely will be there for a couple of years. Even the 2 most recent offers, Cam Whitmore on a Saturday and then Tyler Nickel on a Sunday, they look like guys that are probably going to be in college for a few years. But in North Carolina, it's a place where you can go, where you can grow your game, you can have a damn good time, you can play in those Duke Carolina games, and the kind of exposure you get playing in front of a fan base that's as rabid and huge as North Carolina's, you may have a chance to make some pretty good coin as well.
And across the country, even when you get into conference tournaments, the ACC tournament at the end, especially when North Carolina and Duke are relevant, there's not going to be anything else to compare to that from a national media standpoint. I remember 2 years ago, because I live right outside of Nashville, I was at the SEC tournament. I stayed at a family's house while I was at the tournament, and they didn't live too far away. So I get back there, man, and all eyes in that house, and Duke played North Carolina that Friday night. And, I go from Bridgestone Arena and man, and none of those people are North Carolina fans. None of them are Duke fans. I guess there's one Notre Dame fan in that household. I guess everybody else is Tennessee, and every eye was on Duke, Carolina. That's what they were. That's what the concern was.
That was a great game. That was the one Zion played in, and that was an absolutely amazing. Cam Johnson, here, look out, NBA, here I come kind of game as well that night. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. They had 7 visits, 2 commitments. I think it's a really good start to the class. You got your big guy, and you got your point guard, the one who's going to find everybody else, and he's going to fit in those parts when we get to July and August. And I have a feeling, and this is just a hunch, that by the time we get to the end of August, we're going to have a pretty good idea what this class is going to look like. They'll probably still have a spot open, and they may bring in 5 with this class, but I think they're going to add a couple more guys between now and the end of August, because they're sort of narrowing their focus quite a bit. And that's the other value this month as well.
I've still got to talk to Trout. You know, I was supposed to talk to him this afternoon at 4:00. It didn't happen. And when I talked to him at lunch, they still had not got back to Omaha. They'd been on the road. They got diverted. They were supposed to fly to Detroit and Omaha. They got sidetracked, ended up in Pittsburgh. And from what I understand, laid over last night. And I don't even know if they've got back home yet, to tell you the truth. So if they get –
you're going to have to ask him, by the way, if that impacts how he thinks about North Carolina, because Isaac Trout, for those who don't know, he's from the Omaha, Nebraska area.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that was going to be a question. But if there's a commitment out of that class, I would say it'll be him or Nickel. But I don't know. I think by this time next month, with AAU going on and all that, I'd be surprised if it was anybody else but Garcia. I think if there's a commitment in July, it's going to – I may be wrong. I mean, I think that's the one I would look for first.
Yeah, I think August is when some stuff will happen. They're going to get changed. Yeah. All these kids are going to focus on playing this month and all that, and then we'll see maybe some power.
But this is different. We've never had a summer like this, because here's what would happen in the past. You would take July, and here's what would happen. As soon as the last AAU tournament was over, here's what you did in recruiting media. You found out where the official visits were going to be. They didn't have to tell you who the finalists were, because they would set up 5 official visits for their senior year, and most of them would happen in August, September, October, especially late August when you start playing football weekends. And you knew those were the finalists.
Yeah.
And then you went from there. Now we have the junior visits set up in June. We've never had that before. So now do they visit, like I said, do they visit again? Do they visit 5 new places in August, in September? What they do? It's going to be interesting. And it's like everything else. I'm not sure we've got a grip on it yet.
No, but we're going to be nose to the ground as they go through this process, as we learn more about Hubert and his staff, the way they're recruiting, and also the interesting collection of kids that they've had come in, and the ones that will, once they start lining up some visits for I guess, August and September. Deontay Green's coming in August. That one's still planned. So we'll be all over that when that happens as well. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. For all of your UNC basketball recruiting stuff, you got to go to TarHeelIllustrated.com. It's just $8.33 a month. So don't go through the drive-through one time, and you make your money back right there by going to Tar Heel Illustrated and get all of David's amazing wisdom on a regular basis. Thanks for stopping by.